Well, hello everyone. Happy Sunday. Happy August. Happy Black August. And we are, as always, extremely excited and happy to have all of you here with us today. We welcome you here. This program is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And this is our 17th week in a row doing a presentation on the issues impacting African people and all oppressed humanity. So we are honored and grateful to have each and every one of you here today that are here with us, especially today to honor our true heroes and heroines, our true troops. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. We just wanna start, as we always do, by acknowledging the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. This is their land. You know, it's absolutely incredible and despicable that you could have hundreds of thousands of savages riding motorcycles into sacred indigenous land in South Dakota yesterday. I mean, that's just an absolute disgrace that you have bottom shoe scum desecrating the indigenous people's land the way that happened. But we will forever acknowledge that this is their land. This is their hemisphere. It was stolen from them and it still belongs to them, and they will one day get their land back. And we will do everything in our power to help them in getting their land back. And that's just justice, and it's the right thing that needs to happen. And there will never be any peace here until that happens. So we acknowledge the indigenous people. And of course, we acknowledge our African ancestors who have fought for us since the beginning of the first intrusion into our rights. Since class struggle emerged some 11,000 years ago, and the system of slavery became the dominant economic system on earth, and people began to dominate other people, our people have fought back against injustice. And then when that evolved to the colonial period, 500 plus years ago, which defined the world as we exist in it today, our people have continued to fight against that oppression. From day one, throughout the entire continent of Africa, all the way throughout the rest of the world, we fought, and we continue to fight, obviously. There's nothing new under the sun. So if you're young and you're fighting, you're doing that because you've gotten the spirit of our ancestors, which has been filtered inside of you. Nothing else. So we always acknowledge our ancestors, and we thank the people who join on Zoom. You'll be muted the entire time, but use the chat if you have comments or questions, and on Facebook as well. And we will do our absolute best to check for comments on Facebook, and we will go ahead and get started. And again, we thank you all for being here. So again, sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. The presentation, as always, will be conducted by myself, Ajamu Umi, longtime organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I've had the opportunity and benefit to do this work all over the world, and will continue to do it for as long as I have breath in my body. And joining me from across this colonial country is my amazing and outstanding daughter, Shakura, who has grown up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute program. So her whole life, she's been immersed around the AAPRP and the struggle for justice and liberation. And she is studying for a PhD and has developed and continues to engage in activist work of her own, which is of a high quality nature. So could not be more proud of her. So always glad every week to be joined by her. You know, we don't do dancing videos, we don't do singing videos, although we can do that as well as the people who are doing it. But we come at you as a father-daughter talking about what's necessary to bring about our liberation as a people and our contribution towards the forward advancement of humanity. And so just to give a slight understanding of this, the All African People's Revolutionary Party has a clear objective of Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist Africa. We believe that, as Kwame Nkrumah said, until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. And also, as Nkrumah said, Pan-Africanism is the African contribution to the worldwide communist movement, which we certainly consider ourselves a part of. And if you want to understand what our work consists of, you have to study the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare there, written by Kwame Nkrumah. And in that book, he calls for the unification of all Pan-African revolutionary formations on the ground in Africa into one political formation, the All-African Committee for Political Coordination, under the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. So if you look today, the work that we've done the last 50 years with the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. Azania is the actual name of what you call South Africa. It's a Zulu word that means the land of the black people, burnt faces. So the PAC is one of the organizations that we sister party with. The PAIGC, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, in Guinea-Bissau, the Democratic Party of Guinea, two different countries, the Democratic Party founded by Sekou Touré, who's one of our ideologues in the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, still active. Another sister party for us, the Azanian People's Organization in Azania, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, obviously in Zimbabwe, the Pan-African Union for Sierra Leone, and many other organizations that we have sister relationships with. And all of these organizations have as their objective one unified socialist Africa. So that is our work. And we also have chapters all over the world in relationships with other liberation movements. The struggle of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, absolutely. The Palestinian National Liberation Movement, absolutely. The Irish Republican Socialist National Liberation Movement, absolutely. The Filipino National Liberation Movement, absolutely. We have strong ties with all of those movements and will continue to support because their enemies are our enemies and we don't fight in a vacuum. So we're again honored to have you here and to talk about this extremely important topic of Black August, helping people understand what it is and what we can do to support it moving forward. So to get us started, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. Happy Black August. Okay, so as it has been stated several times over these previous 16 weeks, despite our personal and emotional desire to connect with people we know have decided to ride with the instruments of imperialism, the unquestionable truth is conscious or not, dedicated or not. All representatives of the US military, police, etc., are using violence to continue to perpetuate the capitalist system, which is responsible for a level of death and destruction that is unprecedented in world history. Therefore, objectively speaking, we can never see anyone carrying out that terrorist work as someone worthy of honor. Driven out of confusion? Yes. Economically extorted into their actions? Yes. Worthy of honor? Absolutely not. We are not trying to be flip here, but drug dealers are forced into their destructive behavior due to social conditions too, but we don't honor them for what they do. So excuse us if we refuse to honor anyone who follow immoral orders to kill and fight against people who are only standing up for their dignity and self-determination. So unlike so many cowardly people who pose as people committed to justice, we have no problem saying loud and clear that you should go and get your loved ones who are unfortunately representing the terrorist state institutions for imperialism. They are not heroes, and what they are doing has absolutely nothing to do with any freedoms we have obtained. That is a complete lie that is shoved down our throats by the capitalist imperialist system. But as Sekou Touré taught us, one truth will crush 1,000 lies. The honor we offer is reserved for those people who courageously stand up against the capitalist system, demanding justice for all of humanity. We want you all to continue to be open to a different way of thinking, and that's why we're posing some of these ideas today in terms of helping you reflect, but also maybe reverse what you have already been taught socially in terms of how you were socialized and looking at it from a different perspective. Next slide, please. Do you wish to know who we consider our troops? The glorious freedom fighters for the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, like Sister Theodora Gomes, who participated with the armed struggle against the Portuguese to free Guinea-Bissau from colonialism. This historic sister just participated in our International African Liberation Day program 2 months ago, and you can find the link to the video on the YouTube page. Comrade Fernando Flort, who courageously went undercover in Miami in order to gain information on the US terrorist attacks against socialist Cuba. For his efforts, he spent 16 unjust years in a US prison. The unselfish 500,000 Cuban troops who sacrificed everything to fight against racist mercenaries in Southern Africa. These courageous soldiers of the Pan-African Congress of Azania, as my dad pointed out, that's the non-colonized name. If you know the colonized name, then you refer to it as South Africa. Our family in the Democratic Party of Guinea, who bravely challenged French colonialism and then continued to serve as a base against international imperialism. Our elders and ancestors in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army Universal Negro Improvement Association, Land and Freedom Movement, Mau Mau, located in Kenya. These organizations and many others stood up, and many continue to stand up, so past and current, against all imperialism. Every right we have, every opportunity we possess, we owe 100% to these courageous people who sacrificed everything for justice. And I love how that statement is laid out, because what I want you all to think about, which again is reversing this reversing this capitalist and imperialist ideology, is I want you to think about how other people struggled so that we can be where we are today. Other people sacrificed, other people made choices that in some cases took their own lives, just so that you and I could be having a conversation on Zoom right now. And I think it's really important that we think about that as we continue to figure out how are we going to contribute? What are we going to do now in 2020 to continue making a difference? Because those people struggled for us and now they are no longer here. So what are we going to do with their legacy? And then what is our legacy going to be in terms of the children to come who still deserve a better world than what we currently have currently? They deserve the honor. These troops of ours that I mentioned, they deserve the honor and respect so many of us mistakenly direct towards the forces of injustice. And if we may, we would also like to humbly add the following to our distinguished list of honorable soldiers: the Palestine Liberation Organization and Palestinian resistance organizations, the Irish Republican Socialist Party, the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, the American Indian Movement, Red Nation, and other indigenous organizations fighting for land reclamation and the return of indigenous territories to the indigenous nations. All of these forces fight against injustice, and that qualifies them as our troops. Every day, all day, this will be true despite the propaganda thrown at us 24/7, 365 days a year, to try and convince us to buy into the imperialism plan that justifies their terrorist acts everywhere on planet Earth. We want to honor those who have continued to not just aggravate, but who aggravated. And we want to honor those who not just agitate, but agitated the current dominant system. We thank you, we honor you, and without you, we would not be here today. So thank you so much, and we salute you. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's just start by this portion by talking a little bit about what is Black August? Like, what does this concept come from? And so just a little history as to what it actually means. So if you go back to this brother in the picture, Comrade George Jackson, he was from South LA, or what Hollywood calls South Central LA. And he was incarcerated in the early 60s. a little time after he was incarcerated, he met another brother in the penal institution named W.L. Nolan. And W.L. Nolan became somewhat of a mentor to George Jackson. And the two of them sat down and created a vision for African liberation. And from that vision, George Jackson actually emerged as a best-selling author with his two books, Soledad Brother and Blood in My Eye. And from that vision, they created the concept of a Black guerrilla family, or BGF, which in their minds would be a liberatory organization of African people dedicated to revolutionary socialism. So if you fast forward to January of 1970, there was a fight that broke out at Soledad Prison here in California, in Central California. And the end result of that fight is that 3 Africans who were incarcerated, I don't like the word inmate, who were incarcerated were murdered by prison guards. Shortly after that, in January of 1970, a white prison guard was thrown off of the 4th tier to his death in Soledad Prison. George Jackson, Fleeta Drumgo, and John Plachette were accused of throwing that guard over the tier. So as a result of that, they became known as the Soledad Brothers. If you go to August 7th, which was just a couple of days ago, the 50-year commemoration, August 7th, 1970, was when John Plachette and Fleeta Drumgo and some of the other Africans who were at the Marin County Courthouse for their hearings were there. Young Jonathan Jackson, the younger brother of George Jackson, came into the courtroom and a fracas ensued, and the effort was made to liberate Fleeta Drumgo, John Plachette, William Christmas, and as well as some of the other people who were there. A van was achieved, and the state prison officials opened fire on the van, killing Jonathan Jackson, killing Fleeta Drumgo, killing John Plachette, William Christmas, as well as the judge in the courtroom. The district attorney was paralyzed for life, and the only one of our freedom fighters that survived that incident was Ruchell McGee, Ruchell Senkyu McGee. And brother Ruchell McGee is still in prison today, you all, 50 years. He is probably the longest held political prisoner. I say probably because another former political prisoner, brother Geronimo G. Jaga, or what people knew him as Geronimo Pratt, he said once when he was still in this physical realm that everybody that's locked up is a political prisoner, because if they had different social conditions, they wouldn't have been in a position to be incarcerated in the first place. And I complement that with a meme I saw from a young European brother. And he said, I grew up in the suburbs and we had parties. There were drugs at every party. There were guns at every party. We had everything that the inner city kids get accused of. We just didn't have one thing that they have. We didn't have the police targeting and profiling us. So as a result, we don't get arrested. So with that in mind, and everybody knows that's true, including white parents in the suburbs know that's true, then Geronimo's statement is absolutely correct. And so that's why, I use the language some, because we got people who've been in prison for over half a century, and if the conditions were different, that may not have had to happen. So this incident happened on the Marin County Courthouse in 1970, and our soldiers were killed. And that's something that you should study if you haven't. I mean, there's a long history of that in terms of theories about how some of that might have been set up by the FBI. And that's why the events turned out unsuccessful as they did. That's a whole different seminar in and of itself. But what happened in August the following year, 1971, is George Jackson was murdered in prison. They said he was trying to scale a 20-foot wall and escape. Now, George Jackson was a phenomenal human being. He did 1,000 push-ups every day. And I'm still I'm not even close to 1,000. I'm trying to get halfway there every day. But he did that. And so he was certainly a phenomenal person, but I don't think he could scale a 20-foot barbed wire wall. But that's what they said. And they said he had a pistol, and that was the reason why they killed him. And if you want to tie the dots together, Angela Davis, who was arrested in 1971 and had a international trial, which she was eventually acquitted. The charge that she was given was that she snuck a pistol in her afro into the prison. And I remember all of this because I grew up in San Francisco, as some of you know. And so this was in the news every day because all of this happened right there in the Bay Area. And I remember sitting with my dad watching the Marin County Courthouse event. I remember that as a child. I remember seeing the judge coming out with a shotgun taped to his head and his arms were out. And I remember being traumatized by what happened because I didn't understand it. But one thing I do know is that when I started hearing that story that some African woman had hid a gun in her afro and gotten into prison, even as a child, I knew that was ridiculous. And I just remembered that, as for my whole life, like, is that what white people think? That our hair is that thick, we can hide guns in it? Like, that's wow. I have yet to meet the person with hair that thick. So anyway, that was, those events culminated are what developed into what we call Black August today, a commemoration of our freedom fighters who were murdered. And shortly after George Jackson was murdered, you had the uprising at Attica Prison in New York, where you had the incarcerated people take over the prison and take hostage guards and other prison employees. And the people who were taken hostage made it clear that they were never mistreated, they were never disrespected, they were just held. They were fed, they were allowed to use the facilities as they needed, and the incarcerated people who held them explained to them why they were doing what they were doing. And those people working there, they knew what the conditions were anyway. So they said that, but that did not stop New York state officials from firebombing the prison and killing dozens of incarcerated people, as well as some of the people who were taken hostage. The people who were the spokespersons for the Attica uprising, people like Brother L.C. Barkley had made it plain in their press conference statements that they were reacting to the illegal and unjust murder of George Jackson. And the reason why, in my view, that the state officials in New York engaged in such unwarranted violence against those incarcerated persons is that prison uprising was not just Africans, it was all nationalities. It was indigenous people, Latinos, there were white prisoners involved in the uprising. And if there's nothing that scares this power structure more than working people coming together and rejecting the myth of white supremacy and coming together to challenge the status quo, challenge the capitalist system. That's what they're afraid of more than anything else. And George Jackson, his death symbolized that, and the Attica uprising certainly institutionalized the concept of Black August and the respect for our African freedom fighters and all freedom fighters who are incarcerated and who were there because of their political actions. So the movement of Black August, has evolved over the years from one of, simply looking at incarcerated persons, and I would add just looking at incarcerated persons here in the United Snakes of America, because we have African freedom fighters incarcerated all over the planet Earth. We have African political prisoners in Canada, in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Belgium. We have them all throughout the African continent, of course. We have them all over the place. So Black August, at least in our minds, has evolved to represent that phenomenon. And then also respect for our people who were incarcerated and demanding that they be treated with humanity and developing a process of support for them to ensure that their families are taken care of to the best of our ability, and that we can continue to, build movements so that we can get as many of them out as we possibly can. And then for us as revolutionaries, it also symbolizes that the system is an unjust system. Of course, the capitalist system is an unjust system. And so its design is to incarcerate us, because we pose one of the most, if not the largest, threat to the stability of capitalism. Why? Because the entire capitalist system was built and is maintained on exploiting Africa. Most of us don't really understand that, but it's true. This entire capitalist economy in this society and all the capitalist societies, all of them, is based on exploiting African rare earth minerals and human resources. It's based on that. And so if you have an economy that's based on exploiting Africa that day, of course you need to make sure that the 50 million African people that live in your country are held under thumb, that you have control of them, because clearly they represent the largest threat to your stability. So the prison system exists for us, you all. That's what it exists for. Us and the indigenous people. We pose the largest threat. That's what it's there for. And of course, if there's some poor white people that want to decide they want to resist, then they can go there too. And that's what the system is set up to do. And so what the Black August movement should represent in our eyes, along with all the other things I just mentioned, it should also represent our struggle to challenge this backward system, organize against it, destroy it, and create something better that's more human focused over profit. So that has to be what it's about. And so if we talk specifically about some of the people, and I'm gonna read a partial list of some of our people that are in prison, but you can see many of them here. Clearly, Brother Mumia Abu Jamal, who has been in prison since 1985. The case against him is as bankrupt and corrupt as a case could be. But he's been in prison, and they keep, every couple of years, they march out this wife of this cop who died, and she's on there talking about how Mumia needs to stay in prison. And I've seen roaches that have more credibility than this woman. And so our brother continues to stay in jail with failing health. On 3 separate occasions, we had Pan-African Women's Day yesterday. And if you missed it, you really missed something, because we had members of the MOVE organization on. We had Sister Ramona Africa on, and she was talking about how 3 different times they signed the death warrant to put Brother Mumia to death. And because of the international outrage, of which, I'm happy that we were certainly a part of that, his life was spared. And Mumia knows that. He talks about that all the time. So that certainly, his story is certainly, you should study it if you haven't, certainly an example of what happens to those that stand up against the system. And his writings, he's an outstanding writer. He's certainly one of my inspirations for everything that I write. And he continues in prison today. The center photo, the brother in the picture is Brother Ruchell McGee that I mentioned, who's been in prison not Brother Ruchell McGee. Brother Ruchell McGee is in the picture, the red, black, and green picture there. Sundiata Akoli, who's in the upper right hand, he was in the car with Assata Shakur and was arrested and has been in prison, over 4 decades. Matulu Shakur, the Move 9, who were recently released. Brother Jamil Abdullah Alameen, formerly H. Rat Brown of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of the 60s, has been in prison going on 2 decades. And there are, of course, many, 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 many more. But these people are in prison because they stood up for us, you all. They are our heroes and heroines. I could never in my life, even though when I was a child watching this stuff, I didn't understand it, I still knew that these folks that they were portraying on television as criminals, I still knew that there was a lot more to it than that. And so, as I grew in my level of understanding, I was able to reach a point early in my life, in my teenage years, where I understood that, these people, as Shakur said, people in the US military and police, they can never be heroes to me. I mean, my grandmother used to say, even a dead fish can go with the current. So you follow orders, unjust orders, and you kill people who've done nothing to you. There's nothing honorable about that. And I understand, like Shakur said, the reasons why people join the U.S. military, but that doesn't mean we have to go along with this lie. And we refuse to do that. We're going to tell the truth. You should get out of the U.S. military. We can help you find a job if it's about a job, but you can't be a part of an organization that's committed to destruction and violence against all of humanity. So those people can never be heroes. And I don't understand African people standing here talking about, I thank you for your service, and you don't know anything about these people pictured here and the people who went to prison fighting for the rights that you have, literally fighting for the rights that you have. I remember during the OJ trial in 1995, I upset so many people because people would always ask me, what do you think about the OJ trial? And I would say, I think it's a shame that you know about OJ, who's never been anything of any value to African people anywhere on earth, but you don't know anything about any of these political prisoners that we're talking about today. That's what I would tell people. People get so upset about that, but it's true, and it's still true today. So we honor these people without hesitation. We honor them. There are soldiers. There are troops. So today we recognize them, and we ask people to think about them and to figure out how you can support not only them and their families, but support the movements that landed them in prison and continue to force them to stay in prison in the first place. So we want to make sure that we do that. Again, you know, going back to Brother Jijaga's statement, all people in prison are political prisoners because the system's unjust. And then also, you know, recognizing that Black August, another way that it's evolved, you all, is that it's really developed a strong focus on what's going on with people who are incarcerated. Like, what are their political conditions? How can we support them? There have been a number of strikes that have occurred, food strikes, to bring attention to the inhumane conditions that people incarcerated face. And there have been a growing number of actions every year in August to support those actions on the outside. In fact, there's a big event taking place today at Folsom Prison around prisoner rights. And I was invited to come out there, but you know, we have this seminar, and I think we should try to reach people on every level we can reach people. So I appreciate the organizers of that event inviting me out to that. But it's just a case in point of what we're saying. There are a number of these events that happen to highlight what's happening with our folks and to bring attention. And we certainly should do that. We certainly should participate and support those events and figure out how we can plug in to assist all of our folks who are still incarcerated. And so this is not going to be a complete list by any stretch of the imagination, but just to honor those who have been incarcerated for standing up for liberation. Many of these folks' names that I'm going to read have recently been released, but I still want to read their names because they spent so long in prison. They deserve to be acknowledged for that. Some of them are no longer with us physically, but they still need to be acknowledged. So again, some of them are still incarcerated. Some of them have recently been released or been released, you know, within a relatively recent time. And some of them, unfortunately, are no longer with us. Okay, so I just like everybody to just reflect for a minute on these names and what they stood for. So Rochelle Sinkyu McGee, you know, we're talking 50 plus years. Ugo Yogi Panel, who was 50 years before his unfortunate physical transition. Romaine Chip Fitzgerald, 40 plus years. Marshall Eddie Conway, 40 plus years. Mongo Wilanga, 40 plus years. Ed Poindexter, 40 plus years. Herman Wallace, 40 plus years. Albert Woodfox, 40 plus years. Jaleel Montequin, 40 plus years. Russell Maroon Schultz, that's who's in the picture at the top. I forgot to go back and mention that. 40 plus years. Sundiata Akoli, 40 plus years. Herman Bell, 40 plus years. Veranza Bowers, 40 plus years. Robert Seth Hayes, 40 plus years. Leonard Peltier, our great American Indian movement warrior, 40 years. Chuck, and then these are the Move 9 that were incarcerated who have been released, fortunately. Chuck Africa, Debbie Africa, Delbert Africa, unfortunately, much respect. Eddie Africa, Janet Africa, Janine Africa, who was also on our program yesterday, Michael Africa, Phil Africa, Bill Dunn, 30 plus years, Muhammad and Koti, 30 plus years, David Gilbert, who was, of course, one of our true European accomplices, who has been in prison 30 plus years, Sekou Odinga, who was one of the ones who was recently released. And I went down to the Bay Area and had a chance to meet and chat with him a year or so ago, 30 plus years. Oscar Lopez Rivera, 30 plus years. And I just think it's important because when I've had a chance, I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of these wonderful people, and I had a chance when I went and met Brother Sekou Odinga. I bought his book and I asked him to sign it, and I sat there and talked to him for a few minutes, and the whole conversation was me thanking him for his sacrifice. And I just wanted to say to him that you have inspired a generation of people, and I just hope you know that. And he was so thankful. I mean, we were emotional. He was so humble about that. And this brother spent 33 years in prison because of his work in the Black Panther Party. Most of these folks were Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army members as well, a lot of them. And they ripped his fingernails off his hand, torturing him when he was in prison. And he refused to bow down. Most of us can't even wear a mask for 5 minutes, but this is what these folks endured for justice. So, they deserve all the praise we can give them. Zulu Azania, 30 plus years. Mumia Abu Jamal, 30 plus years. Abdullah Masjid, 30 plus years. Jan Isman, 30 years. Tom Manning, 30 years. Matulu Shakur, approaching in the above 30 years. Jamil Alameen, who we talked about, formerly H. Rap Brown, going on 2 decades. Kamal Siddiqui, going on 2 decades. Lynn Stewart, our European accomplice lawyer, attorney, been in prison now for several years. And of course, we always, when we talk about political prisoners, we have to mention our sister, Assata Shakur, and our gratitude that she found refuge in Cuba and that she's been safe there for decades, and she continues to be safe there. And if we mention that, and Brother Matulu Shakur, who was convicted in part for assisting in her sister Assata's escape, we have to, of course, mention our other European accomplice, our departed Marilyn Buck, who spent 33 years in prison, and who, at Assata's advice, when I visited Cuba and talked to her, advised me to contact Marilyn, because Marilyn was right down here in Northern California at the Federal Women's Prison in Dublin, California. And I developed a wonderful relationship with Marilyn before she passed. From 1994 up to 2010, when she passed, I visited her multiple times. Shakura visited her with me. And we had the opportunity to sit down all day and talk with her. And she was incarcerated for the Brinks robbery in 1991 and assisting Assata Shakur in escaping. So we acknowledge all of our political prisoners, the people who sacrificed for us. They didn't just talk about struggle, they engaged in it. They didn't just talk about sacrifice, they made sacrifice. They didn't just talk about dying for the people. Everybody, I will die for my people. These people live for our people. Anybody can say they can die for the people. We want to know, are you willing to live for our people? Are you willing to fight for our people? And we're not saying that you have to go to prison. Oh, we don't want anybody to go. We don't want them in prison. We don't want anybody to go to these vicious backward prisons that this backward state has. But you can do things to help advance our struggle. Like there are prison, there are writing campaigns to write. It's important to do that. I have a number of folks that I wrote. That's how I got to know Maryland. I used to write Geronimo when he was in there. I wrote Hugo Pinell, all of these people. You can write these folks. You can go online and get their addresses from the institution they're in. And you know, most of these states, I know California, they have a website where you can find out where they are. So it's easy to get the address, take you a few minutes, and you can just write them. And even if you just say, thank you for your sacrifice, you will be shocked at how often they will respond to you and express to you their appreciation for you, acknowledging their existence. I feel like that's the least we can do. So I think everybody should adopt at least one person. I just read about 30 names. Everybody should adopt at least one person and just start writing them. If you can do that, that would be a wonderful thing. Find out if their families need anything. Try to organize, mobilize support for their families. Maybe they need resources to visit their persons that were incarcerated. You know, we've done in the APRP, we've done a lot of that work. A lot of people don't know it, but we've done a lot of that kind of work, just supplying support to people. You know, when I lived in Portland, Oregon, we have our honored brother up there, Brother Kent Ford, who founded the Black Panther Party chapter in Portland, Oregon. And his son was railroaded on COINTELPRO charges. And his son has been in prison for over a decade. And we've raised money a couple of times for Brother Kent Ford to visit his son. His son is down here in California. He's been moved to different places. But do that. Figure out how you can do that and support them that way, and support the events and get involved in those types of actions. That's the least we can do, y'all, for our comrades who have sacrificed so much for us, so much, okay? So I wanna say, like, concretizing support for the movement around Black August. I wanna say a couple of things about what we need to do. We talked about letter writing. So, you know, please do that. Please adopt someone and write them and let them know you're thinking about them. You know, they want to know that you're thinking about them. And a lot of the stuff that happens in prison, those of us on the outside, like, we have no idea what's going on, what they're doing to our folks in prison. We really just don't know because we're not there. We don't know what's going on. And I remember, you know, I would be in constant contact. I mentioned Marilyn Buck because I was in constant contact with her when she was living. And she would explain things to me that, you know, you just don't know. Like, one time we were organizing an event for African History Month in the women's federal prison. And I was working through her to organize the event. And it was coming to the date when it was scheduled to happen. And I didn't hear from her when we had, you know, earmarked, we would get a letter in the mail. And I was calling the prison and they wouldn't tell me anything. And then I got a call from some comrades in the Bay Area who were from what was then called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. And they told me that the prison canceled the event and they had put Marilyn in solitary confinement. And so, you know, I waited several weeks and then finally I got word from her, and then I went to visit her immediately after I got word from her. And you all, she explained to me that, I don't know if you all remember when they had, after 9/11, they had these color codes. And like, if it was, I don't remember the colors because it was absurd anyway, but if they had, for example, if it was yellow today, the threat of a terrorist attack was supposedly the highest. Okay, so, you know, they would always report on that in the news. But what she explained to me is that whenever there is that, say if it's yellow, that day comes because she and all of these people I named are considered domestic terrorists, they're immediately automatically put in solitary confinement. And that's just what happens all the time. Every time, you know, something like this happens on the outside that has nothing to do with the institution they're in, that's what happens to them. And a lot of these people, like, if you know, Albert Woodfox just came out with an autobiography. You should definitely read it if you haven't. And he, you know, he was in solitary confinement for decades. And a lot of that was because he just refused to bow down to what they wanted him to bow down to. So, you know, this support for these folks is essential. So if you can do that, you should definitely do it. But also, you know, because again, we're revolutionaries, we want to say a lot of people over the years, like they've accused the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Well, they're not really that concerned about, African political prisoners. No, we're very concerned. But we just feel that we have to attack the reasons why they got incarcerated in the first place. We have to attack the system. And that's gonna happen only on an organized mass level. It's not gonna happen with just a few of us. So that's the work that we're doing. So we feel like it's important to say also that we want to support all of our people that are in prison. And I, certainly have done my best to articulate that up to this point. But we also want to encourage you to get involved in the struggle to liberate our people, because when we do that, we don't have to worry about this problem of incarceration anymore. So that means we have to get people engaged in the struggle. The best way you can honor someone is to continue their work. That's the best way you can honor them, is to continue their work. So when I think of all the people who have passed on, Kwame Ture, I think of Kwame Ture every day. And I always think about what I can do to try to continue the work that he established that I'm able to participate in. Mawina Coyote, most of you won't know who she is, but she was an outstanding woman who was an organizer with us for many years and was active in building our All-African Women's Revolutionary Union. I think about her every day and how I can make that contribution and continue to work, because that's the best way to honor her. Our brother here in Sacramento, Brother Omowale, who was the founder of the Black Panther Party branch here, he just recently made his physical transition. I think of him all the time, and the great conversations I had with him, and how I can continue to struggle, thinking of his great sacrifice, and all the people like that. So it's important that we carry on the work. That's the best way to honor somebody, you all, is to carry on the work that they're doing. That's the best way to demonstrate that you respect what they did. So we encourage people to do that. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. And we ask people to think about Kwame's statement, because he said our movement is so weak that we leave our soldiers on the battlefield. So what he's talking about is all of our people in prison there. We don't even know they're there. We don't even know anything about them. We sitting here today talking about Suge Knight in prison, Jeffrey Epstein in prison. I don't care if Suge Knight spends 200 years in prison. I want to talk about these people who fought for our liberation and are in prison. And if all you know about is Suge Knight and you don't know anything about Sundiata Acoli, we need to correct that. We need to correct that. So we got to get our soldiers off the battlefield. No question about that. And so I want to mention the Jericho Movement. There are many organizations today that are involved in this work around incarcerated people. Organizations like Critical Resistance, and they all do excellent work. But I just want to highlight the Jericho Movement because they've been doing this for decades. And a lot of times, we forget the people who were doing the work before it was popular. Nothing against anybody doing it now. That's great. We need more people doing it. But I want to acknowledge them because they're the organization when I was in my teens that informed me about many of these folks at that time, and they've been continuing to move on with that. So I want to encourage people to support their efforts, definitely. If you don't know about them, find out and support what they do. And then our problem, again, we say this all the time, but our problem is most of our people are not in any organization. And we are never going to get free like this. We just are not. It's the numbers game will never work out in our favor if most of our people are not involved in our struggle for liberation. We have to get as many of us as possible involved in our organization, because if we do that, then we can really begin to understand what it takes to solve these problems. You can't understand it, you're not involved in the work to challenge it. You might think you understand it, but there's no way you can understand it. It's just like the example I gave a few weeks ago. You're going on a journey and you don't have a vehicle and you're criticizing how people engage in the journey. Well, you don't even know because you haven't even started. And you're criticizing what kind of car people are engaged in their journey on. Well, how can you don't even know what a journey feels like. You're still standing still. You have to first get a car, any kind of car, it doesn't matter. And then once you get in that car and start moving, then you can figure out, okay, I need one that has more horsepower. I need one that has better air conditioning, better sound system, more leg room, whatever. But the only way you understand that is by participating in the journey. So the only way you understand our people's struggle is participating in the struggle. You can't stand on the outside. You can't work for a nonprofit. You can't stand on the outside and think you understand our liberation struggle. That's an insult to all these people we're talking about today. And we got to stop doing that. So we need people to join organizations, independent organizations working for our people. Please do that, because, you know, it's clear where we're at. We get excited about 1,000 of us marching with guns. We didn't eliminate one white supremacist with those guns, but we get excited because 1,000 of us are marching with them. And how is that going to solve our problem when most of us aren't even in our organizations? It'd be different if we had 75% of our people organized, and then we engage in some action based on that being an organizational movement from our organizational capacity. Because if we were doing that, we wouldn't just be marching with the guns. We'd have a whole lot more going on than just that. So we got to get people in organization, and we got to make those people that are in organizations, we got to make our existing organizations stronger. And that means contributing to them, working with them, helping build them up, not getting in, half doing it, and then as soon as there's a conflict, you're gone. Well, then, you know, all you did was drain resources. We got to get people to make a commitment and get involved and stay through the rough patches, help it, build it stronger. And if you can't stay with that organization, you have to join some other organization working for justice. You know, we build work study processes, and we have one going on down here. And one of the young people that joined said, I just can't make the commitment. And I said, no worries, you know, best of fortune to you, but you got to join some organization working for justice. And they said, well, why did you say that? And I'm like, because it's the truth. You don't have to be in our organization, but you got to commit to some organization working for justice. There's no scenario where that's not true, you all. And then in the organization, we got to create, the organizations have to have political education programs. They have to have constant study. We have to study. We cannot engage in romanticism, performance art. We've got to get serious about studying the conditions that exploit and oppress us so that we can figure out how to organize and overcome them. And a part of that political education has to be anti-capitalism. We can't be, you know, this is, with all that's going on in the world, and we're still talking about where the answer is buy in black. I mean, I just don't even know what to say about that at this point. I mean, look, I have plenty of friends who have businesses, plenty of them, and I support them wholeheartedly. And why? Because that's how they feed their families. And this is a racist system, so they're not going to be able to get jobs to do that. So that's how they feed their families. So I support them wholeheartedly and will always do that. But I'm not confused. That's not how we liberate ourselves. It's a survival tactic. It's a necessary survival tactic. But don't come to me talking about, well, this is our pathway to liberation by buying into the capitalist system, where you have no evidence to support that. Capitalism is destroying our people all over the earth, all over the earth. So even though I, understand that about supporting our families and do it and will continue to do it, I also know that a lot of these Africans who are in business, they don't treat you any better than the Europeans that are in business, because their primary objective is profitability. So that's a problem, you all. Like, that has to be addressed. So that's clearly not the solution. It's a survival tactic. But we have to have an anti-capitalist focus. The fact that we still have to debate that in 2020, that tells you we're not studying. And that we also have to have a focus against white supremacy, because white supremacy is used, obviously, you all know it. And if you don't know it, it's because you're on here as a police agent or a troll or something. It's used to oppress and exploit our people, as well as patriarchy. We have to have an anti-patriarchal framework and an anti-homophobic framework. Again, I don't understand, and I'm as heterosexual as it gets as a man, but I still don't understand how anybody can believe that our pathway to liberation is by separating ourselves as a people and saying, well, you're not welcome because of who you are. I just will never accept that. And the reason why I'll never accept that is because once you open that door, where do you close the door? So, okay, so if you're transgender or you're gay, you can't be a part of our community and our organization. So then after that, what's next? If you're overweight, you can't be in our organization. If if you wear fake hair, you can't be in our organization. If you have diabetes, you can't be. I mean, it's just absurd. Clearly, the pathway to our liberation is every African must be free. Every African must be organized. And so you can sit around if you want, worried about those things. I'm trying to organize every African that I can to do that. Because the more we organize around our liberation, the stronger we're going to be. Nobody can really effectively organize that, so, or can argue that rather. So all those things have to be a part of our political education process. And then I would just add that one of the things that I'm saying is that we should build community defense projects in our organizations. And I see that as a connection to our All African Committee for Political Education work in Africa that I mentioned at the beginning. It's a connection to that. It's a way to prepare our people to organize on a mass level. So these are the things we should be doing. And if we want to honor our people that are in prison, these things are great ways to do that. Because all these people were in prison because they fought for our liberation. When I talked to, I got a chance to meet Geronimo Gijaga when he got out of prison. He came up here and we spoke on a program together shortly before he moved to Tanzania. And I also want to mention, the good folks in Tanzania at the United African Community compound there, Brother Pete O'Neill, who can't come back here because, they got charges on him, and Sister Mama Charlotte O'Neill. I had the privilege of going there and staying there with them a couple of years ago, and Geronimo was there. And when he was here in Sacramento, he was talking about how many times he went to parole, 9 times, I think he told me, parole hearings. And what they were asking him to do is basically snitch on people, and they would offer him a shortened sentence, and he just refused to do it. So, and I heard the same kind of stuff with Marilyn Buck. She said that they would ask her who helped Assata escape, and they would reduce her time, and she told him, and she never told him anything. And I didn't ask her any questions because I wouldn't ask her that. I didn't ask her, who are you talking about? I just listened. I'm like, wow. And she's like, she could have had her freedom. She refused to do that. So that's what they do to our people, y'all. So the best way we can help is to do these things we're talking about, and especially these things here, get involved in the struggle so that we can build capacity and we can break a whole lot of Assata Shakurs out of prison. That will be the best day on earth. So the last thing is we want to encourage you again to join an organization and have political education in that organization and do all these things, and go to our site. If you want to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we strongly encourage you to do that if you're African. And you can do that by going to aaprp-intl.org. There's also political education articles there that are talking about a lot of the issues of the day, very important. So please go there and support. And then contribute some money to the AAPRP. We're a poor organization. Help us to build. Y'all give money to all these organizations that don't do nothing for African people. Contribute to some organizations that are really on the ground doing some work. Those are the ones who need it. So help us out. But if you don't do that, at least go there and read the articles and get politically informed, right? And hopefully you'll join. And then the middle one is my blog. I just wrote an article yesterday about how our enemies use our deceased revolutionaries against current movements. It's a very sly tactic they use to do that. So you can read about that and other things, or you can reach out to me. As I woke up today, a number of people, I was trolled, people with death threats. So they always reach out. I don't worry about that. My grandmother told me, boy, ain't everybody supposed to like you. And Ahmed Secretary told us, if the enemy ain't doing anything against you, you ain't doing anything. So if I go too long without death threats, I start to worry whether I'm still doing what I need to be doing. And last but not least, hoodcommunist.org is a great site. African revolutionaries from a number of organizations. I'm humble and privileged to contribute there as well. So support that. And Shakur, is there anything else we need to focus on?
No, sir, nothing at this time.
Okay, well, appreciate you as always. Love you, appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll have another topic next week. We're just going to people keep coming, people keep participating. We have hundreds of people every Sunday, so we'll keep it going until that stops. So we thank you. Tell a friend that we're doing this, and we will see you next Sunday. Join an organization working for justice, ready for revolution, forward ever, backwards never.